And now, your go-to source for year-round fantasy hockey advice, DFS, and betting coverage. This is NHL Fantasy on Ice, presented by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.
It is time to draft in the fantasy hockey world. With that in mind, it's time to put a focus on keeper leagues, brought to you by good friends over at Skip. Hello and welcome to another edition of NHL Fantasy on Ice. Nick Alberga and Jake Hahn with you. What's going on, Jake?
Not too much, Nick. Skip, of course, the official food delivery app of the NHL, and I'm looking forward to getting into some keeper league conversations with you, some injury updates off the top here as well.
I can't wait, Jake. The season is so close, and it's the best time of year if you're a fantasy hockey owner. We got lots coming on today's podcast. We got Pete Jensen coming up in mere moments. We'll hit on the news and notes from the last week as the last time we spoke. Put an emphasis on keeper leagues today, debates, analysis, listener questions. That's all coming up. And also we'll get you set for the upcoming season from a betting lens. Our guy Tim Kalinowski from Snapback Sports will join us later on. Cup Futures, Hard Talk, Vezina, Calder. I don't know what else we can bet on, but Jake, we're going to talk about it, buddy.
Well, if you can bet on something, I'm in. You know me well enough to know if we can gamble on it, then I'm certainly in on that conversation. So I'm looking forward to chatting with Tim about that, and obviously Pete and a keeper league conversation. But off the top here, Nick, we have so many injuries. It feels like this preseason more than any other preseason. Every day we've got a new injury, a new big player popping up on the injury report.
I know you're watching the game on Saturday. Patrik Laine gets hurt against the Toronto Maple Leafs, took a knee-on-knee. We'll find out more in the coming days what's going on there, but just tough luck all around, and tough luck for the Montreal Canadiens. And from a fantasy perspective, it's unique too because of Laine's deployment. He was going to be on PP1. How would you attack it, Jake?
Man, it's brutal. I do feel bad for Patrik Laine. Obviously, we don't know the extent here at this point in terms of the length of injury. It didn't look great. I mean, if anybody saw the replay of that injury, it looked bad. It looks like it has possibility to be long-term. I mean, I still really like the way that power play sets up, even without Patrik Laine. It's just unfortunate if you did a draft already and you spent the pick on Laine. Obviously, you're a little bit nervous seeing if he's going to be out for an extended period of time. But all in all, just feel bad for the guy, really. Like it's just tough for him to stay healthy at this point.
To me, I think going into the season, if I had to handicap Montreal with or without Laine, I still wondered if they can keep the puck out of that, if they can score enough goals. I wonder about their depth up the middle. And for me, Laine going down, you would think he's going to miss a couple games at the very least. It means more for Alex Newhook, Josh Anderson, Josh Waugh. But I think initially there's got to be a negative impact across that roster because the secondary scoring was so massive. And that's what Laine was going to bring to the table. And Jake, I think from the first power play perspective, that was going to be a unique look to have just a designated shooter alongside like a Cole Caulfield.
Well, yeah, I was always curious what they were going to do with him on the power play. And I mean, eventually when he gets healthy, we will see what they do. I don't think he's going to miss the whole season or anything like that. I mean, that would be brutal if he did. But I was curious because you do have a shooter in Caulfield, like you mentioned, Nick. And it seemed like at least second half of last year's season, Slafkovsky liked to shoot the puck quite a bit as well. So if we also put Laine on there, is that too many mouths to feed in terms of who's going to be the shooter on that power play? So I actually think in terms of the guys that are still there, a lot of value on a Caulfield, a lot of value on a Slafkovsky still. Maybe we're just avoiding Laine if you're still drafting over these next weeks or so.
That injury bug does not care that it's the preseason. I, for one, Jake, I don't dabble in the preseason. I couldn't care less what happens. I can't stand the statistics point of it. We just get ready for the regular season. The Los Angeles Kings, man, they lose their number one defenseman in Drew Doughty, a broken ankle, out at least a couple months. Their new top pairing, Gavrikov, Jordan Spence. But right away, I see Doughty go down. My fantasy lens goes up. Big moment right now for Brandt Clarke, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and I already was kind of bullish on Brandt Clarke to maybe, start to take over that role as the season goes on. I did my first draft last week, Nick, and within 24 hours, Doughty was hurt, and I already have an injury after drafting Doughty. So, hey, that's what happens when you do some drafts a little bit early, and you can look to the waiver wire. I think it's just so tricky, isn't it, with defensemen, Nick, especially if you're in a deep league. Like the league I drafted Doughty in, 16-team league. You go to the waiver wire to pick up a replacement defenseman. It's just not there. So I think it's important in your draft to maybe find some depth on the back end because I'm looking at the options on the waiver wire to replace Doughty, and I'm seeing nobody that's even sniffing a power play, and that's difficult.
Well, that's the thing. I think I would take a wait and see approach to see how things branch out in the regular season. The guy we'll talk about later on, Adam Boqvist, I think is a suitable replacement. I think if you're looking for somebody to replace the injured Drew Doughty right now, but from an LA Kings perspective, I think this is a significant blow. Drew Doughty eats up so many minutes. We talked about the blue line. I think they're a work in progress. And I just wonder about the crease as well. David Riddick's had a pretty good camp. Darcy Kemper, they picked up in the Dubois trade from the Washington Capitals. As a whole, how much does your mind change from the Los Angeles Kings perspective, Jake?
I've liked this Kings team the last couple of years, but I think I'm trending in the other direction with this team at this point. I just feel like we've seen it every month. They have a ceiling month where they just play their best hockey, and you think, man, this is going to be a tough team to beat in the playoffs. And then every year they lose in the first round, and it feels like each year they're getting worse and worse in that matchup against the Edmonton Oilers. So I think they're a fringe playoff team, Nick. I do. I still think that they can make the playoffs. I'm not. As much as Doughty is very important to this team, I think they could tread water. I'm kind of bullish on what Kemper can do there. I don't hate him as a play in fantasy, even a Fiala, a Kempe in some of the early rounds in fantasy hockey. So I still think there's a ton of value on that Kings roster. But in terms of a long out season or a long season look, playing a future, anything like that, I'm not bullish on the Kings making a long run this year.
Jake, training camp is so weird because we see a lot of guys banged up, but you almost have to take it with a grain of salt because teams just getting ready for the regular season. Among them are Temi Panarin. We know Jason Robertson had surgery back in July to remove a cyst, so we wonder about him for the opener. Elias Lindholm, Matt Boldy's week to week, a big-time loss right now for the Minnesota Wild. Luke Hughes, as we found out last month. And John Tavares in Toronto. The Maple Leafs have had some bad luck. Austin Matthews dealing with an upper body injury, hasn't played in about a week. But what's your view on John Tavares right now?
Well, I'm curious your take on this in general, Nick, because I do think that you could find some value. Like, people do get scared off a little bit when you see any injury tag on a player, right? Obviously, Doughty and Laine are different conversations where it looks like significant injuries and we maybe have a bit of a timeline. But some of these bumps and bruises, I think guys, they're finding reasons not to play in the preseason, right? Oh, okay, I got something nagging me a little bit. I don't really want to play these preseason games anyways. So if they drop a couple spots in your draft, I think you could actually find some value. I'm never too worried, to draft a day-to-day guy going into the season. Tavares, I think, is fascinating because, and again, you follow this team closely, Nick. Do you think there's some value in Tavares this year? Because it feels like he's still going to be, part of that top six conversation, first power play, and he's going pretty late in drafts right now.
Unequivocally is my answer, Jake. I did 2 drafts last week. One was a keeper league, and nobody wants to touch John Tavares. I love the revenge arc. People act like this guy's 45 years of age. We talked about it. It's probably going to be a bit of a tertiary role to try Willie Nylander up the middle. There's a chance that he's going to start the season playing with Max Pacioretty. But the big thing for me, Jake, PP1. Mark Savard's running the first power play. They're not changing things. That means exposure to Austin Matthews, Nylander, Marner. I think Tavares is going to get his points. And I think at the end of the day, when this contract plays out, I think the Leafs might have to pay a bit more than they intended to, because I think Tavares is going to pick up points. Like, this guy has been a point per game player for pretty much the entirety of his career. I don't know how he's just going to fall off a cliff here.
Well, whenever I'm looking at these things, I like to look at the upside and the downside. I think that the downside to Tavares would be like, what's the worst case scenario? He ends up on the third line and he gets bumped off the first power play. I guess that scenario exists, but the upside is what you said. He's first power play. He gets his top 6 looks and he ends up around a point per game and picks up a lot of power play points. So I think we're more likely to see the upside from Tavares, and where he's getting drafted right now, I think presents a lot of value. And that's the part of the draft where I'm willing to take a little bit of a risk.
I want to get into the crease, and then we'll bring in Pete Jensen from NHL.com. I guess Jeremy Swayman's not playing hockey this year, Jake. Is that what's going on? Yeah.
No, I talked about guys that are trying to not play preseason. He's not playing regular season either. Apparently, they got to get something done here, Nick. I thought by the time we'd be speaking, late September, early October, they'd have this thing locked up. Maybe he'd miss camp or have a slow start to the season. But they're playing hardball in Boston, and I think the Bruins are basically saying, you know what? We could survive the season. We could, start Korpisalo to start the year. We're not going to cave into Swayman's demands right now. So a little uncomfortable between the two sides, and it makes it really tricky. Like, what are you doing in drafts with Jeremy Swayman right now? Because we all really like the spot for him coming into this year.
That's another theme I noticed even with Mock Draft 1.0. Go check out that episode from last month where it's like people wonder about Jeremy Swayman. With that in mind, I think the best case scenario you can do is handcuff that Bruins crease. And with that, I mean Jonas Korpisalo. I think he's sort of the outlier, the forgotten guy in that Linus Ullmark trade. Like, there's a reason why he got that contract. And now you put him going from an Ottawa team who wasn't very structured defensively. Maybe that's different under Travis Green. But you go to Boston, Jake, you know what you're going to get from the Bees. And I actually think there's a lot of value with or without Swayman when it comes to Joonas Korpisalo. Do you agree?
And well, I loved Korpisalo before this whole Swayman situation happened. And I all along, I felt like something would get done before the season, but I already felt like there was going to be so much value in Korpisalo because I didn't think it was going to be full car keys to Swayman. I could see them splitting starts to an extent this year anyways. Now you factor this in. I mean, it's hard not to love Korpisalo, and he's still not getting drafted all that high. I've done a couple drafts so far. Still think there's a ton of value in the Corpedo. So I'm certainly deploying the Corpedo this year, Nick.
Love it. Love the nickname. The Vancouver Canucks, Thatcher Demko. This has just been weirdly handled from the onset. I want to get to the Vancouver Canucks goaltending story. Artur Silovs is probably the guy you're handicapping, with Thatcher Demko probably unlikely to start the season here, right?
Demko's it's so tough, man. I don't want to draft a goaltender that's already hurt. And you see so many conflicting reports. One week you see, okay, he's gonna have to play with this injury for his whole career now. He's gonna have to change the way that he plays. Then you see a report that says, no, he's actually gonna be okay. So I just think it's a situation that I'd like to avoid. And I'll let it beat me. Look, if Demko stays healthy and has a Vezina-like season, I'll tip my cap. There's just other goaltenders in that range that I feel like are safer at this point.
Last but not least, Jake, the New York Islanders crease is really, really fascinating. Ilya Sorokin drops in camp early in camp, off-season surgery. Who knows about his availability for the opener for the Islanders? But again, Semyon Varlamov is a guy people are going to sleep on, but I would look at him right now.
Yeah, well, and Patrick Waugh doesn't seem he doesn't seem nervous to go to him, right? We saw last year Sorokin lost his job, and he's like, hey, this is the guy that's gonna give me the best chance to win games and make the playoffs. I'm going to go with him. So if that happens again, I don't think Patty Waugh is going to be afraid to make that switch. That being said, I still have a lot of interest in Sorokin and the bounce back potential this year, Nick. I'm not too worried about the injury. It sounds like it's nothing long-term. And I'd be much more willing to take a shot on Sorokin earlier in a draft than I would Demko based on reading the tea leaves right now.
I love it. Our guy, Tim Kalinowski from Snapback Sports, is coming up. Just a deep dive. I got a Sorokin flyer for the Vezina Trophy, so I'm feeling good about that, although he's going to start the season, it seems, on the shelf. Let's get into the Keeper League situation and dive into that now with Pete Jensen of NHL.com. Pete, great to see you once again. The Keeper Leagues are always fascinating, but who's the number one guy that you're asked about all the time?
I've been asked a lot about the Dallas guys this year. They're crowded in the top 25 of our keeper rankings. You can find them on NHL.com/fantasy. It's 25 and under guys, so it no longer includes McDavid and Matthews and McKinnon and the like. But number one is Connor Bedard, but crowded again, the Dallas Stars with number 9, Wyatt Johnston, number 1 among star players. How about that? Jake Ottinger, Logan Stankoven, Miro Heiskanen, and then Jason Robertson, who you mentioned has a little injury concern, but that team's loaded now and moving forward.
Pete, I'm not one to get too enamored with preseason and, flashy young players and seeing highlights, but how do I not get obsessed with Matvei Michkov and some of the things he's doing out there? I get it's preseason hockey, but he looks like he has potential to be special. So what are we doing with him in keeper leagues? I'm sure he's a guy you're getting asked about a lot as well.
I'll tell you what Tortorella and Michkov should each do. They should check their egos at the door and try to maximize this guy because he's been lightning in a bottle in the preseason. And I think if it works out and there are no healthy scratches or drama, the Flyers will make the playoffs because they were so damn close last year, right, guys? So I feel like it's such an important infusion of talent on that forward group. So I'm really excited about his chances of winning the Calder. The safe pick is Logan Stankoven from the Dallas team that's stacked that I just mentioned, but I feel like the door is open here for Michkov to win the Calder.
It really feels too like Philadelphia's been craving this type of player, just the exuberance, the flamboyance, everything he brings to the table there, playing with Tippett and Frost, first power play unit as well, 6 points in the preseason. How do you not get excited? A couple other guys you mentioned, Stankoven and Lane Hudson. I've watched him quite a bit so far here in the preseason. Defensively, we'll say work in progress, but Pete, he's going to be a lot of fun to watch offensively, which is music to the ears of fantasy owners, I think.
Right. Hudson, I know you've been singing his praises all off season. I mean, he has a chance to overcome the spot of Matheson for Montreal. Even without Laine, I like that power play one with Slavkovsky, Nick Suzuki, point per game player. And we know that Cole Caulfield has that dynamite goal scoring ability. I just feel like this rookie class is the best one that I've ever seen, really. Even a Will Smith for the Sharks. Everybody's talking about, right, Celebrini and Askarov when he gets healthy, but Will Smith led the NCAA in scoring last year. To me, he's the sleeping giant of this entire rookie class. Not saying he's going to win the Calder, but he could really drop a bomb here and score 65 points or something like that, I think.
Well, yeah, Pete, I think the Sharks are obviously fascinating for those reasons, right? Because you get the big stud, Celebrini, everyone's going to get excited there. You mentioned Will Smith too. How patient should we be with Askarov? Because I think we can all agree there's going to be some growing pains there. Like Celebrini and Smith, they're going to get their touches. Guys are going to score goals. But in terms of keeping the puck out of the net, that could be a major challenge for the Sharks over these next couple of years. So how patient would you stay with Askarov in a keeper league?
I think he's a stash right now, right, guys? Just like Wallstedt is. I think if you're looking for starts among rookie goalies, you're going with Seelovs for Vancouver, who could be the 1B even if Demko is healthy, right? He just willed them to the second round with all their injuries last year. He is Calder Trophy eligible. So if you are placing a wager and saying, hey, you know, this guy could play if Demko's injured, maybe he's a dark horse for the Calder. And then Dustin Wolf. I have no faith in the Flames, but he's probably going to play like 50 games, I think.
I just have a feeling one of these teams nobody's talking about is going to make like a serious jump, whether it's Calgary, Minnesota, like just the randomness of the NHL. You just never know. And that's why I wonder about San Jose. Having said that, I haven't broke down the Askarov trade, but I think it's so fascinating. He ends up with the San Jose Sharks. You wanted to play in the NHL? Good luck with that, because I think there's going to be obviously some growing pains with San Jose. Talk about growing pains. Pete, is it unfair to set the bar for our guy, Connor Bedard, on this podcast, 40 goals, 100 points? Is that too extreme for you?
Yeah, I don't know that he's going to hit both of those. Maybe he could hit one, maybe 30, 35 goals and 80, 90 points sounds more realistic to me. I will say that if Chicago's a lot better and has, you know, Lev Shinov, the rookie, if he's healthy near the start of the season, Taylor Hall sounds like he's definitely healthy. So take a flyer on Taylor Hall, former MVP in late rounds. There's Bertuzzi, there's Teravainen. There's a lot more talent on that team. And if he has that team anywhere near contention in the West, I don't think he will, but if he does, he'll get some Hart Trophy consideration for doing so. So the sky is the limit for this guy. Number one in our keeper rankings, and keep him at all costs. Draft him high as possible in keeper and dynasty leagues.
Nick mentioned, the possibility of maybe Minnesota being a bit of a surprise team there. And they're actually a team that I do have my eye on, guys, because obviously we know, with the situation with the buyout penalties that are going to be done at the end of this year. And I'm bullish what Bill Guerin can do with that cap space, but I think they have potential to do something as early as this year. And Pete, I wanted to ask you about Wallstedt, but between the pipes, is he a legitimate play for this year, or is he someone we're looking, more a couple years down the road? It's a messy crease with three guys there. But I do think Wallstedt has potential to maybe take that net over by, middle of the season this year.
Yeah, it's going to have to probably be an injury because those other guys, Fleury and Gustafsson. I know you took Jake Wright Gustafsson as a write-in pick on our mock draft 1.0. It wasn't really that random of a pick. 2 years ago, he was a big steal for them. So I think if those guys are healthy, Wallstedt, unfortunately, is going to be on the back burner. Askarov, I was listening the other day on Sirius XM, actually, the coach for San Jose was saying when Askarov comes back, they'll get him a game and they'll see how it goes. So, I'm not as worried about him leaping like a Blackwood or a Vanacek in that goalie situation. He could take command on that very early.
Yeah, I echo those sentiments when it comes to Minnesota. I think Wallstedt is there, but I think they're going to be patient, similar to some other teams. We found that out the hard way last year with Buffalo. I think Spencer Knight is another guy to watch at the Florida Panthers. I think obviously Bobrovsky getting a bit older, aging by the year, wins the cup. He's played a lot the last couple of years. Wouldn't sleep on that. Brought to you by good friends over at Skip. We got a lot of questions about the Colorado Avalanche. We have Cale Makar, Pete, number 2 on the Keeper League under 25 list. What's your general view on Makar and Colorado this season? A lot of concerns and questions with that team right now.
Right. 3 of the top 10 players in overall formats, Mikko Rantanen contract year. These are slam dunks. I would take Rantanen over injured Artemi Panarin without thinking twice about it right now. And for Makar, he's the number 1 defenseman out there based on his potential. And you could say all you want about Bouchard or Yossi, or Quinn Hughes, their chances of getting to 100 points. I think if Cale Makar stays healthy, he'll get to 100 points this season. So that's going to be really interesting to see. For Colorado, I worry about the goaltender, Georgiev. I know he's led the league in wins the past 2 years, but that's a slippery slope, right, guys? And they don't have the secondary scoring that they used to. Nichushkin's not starting the season. Lekkonen's banged up right now. I worry about the secondary scoring from a team standpoint in Colorado.
Another interesting question we got from one of our listeners, Keeper League question here, Pete. 10-team Keeper League. Who are you keeping between Igor Shesterkin and Jeremy Swayman? Two of the big boys. We know what's going on with Swayman. 10-team keeper. Who are you just going to roll with Igor because he's the safer play, or do you still think there's value with Swayman there?
There's a little uncertainty with both of them, right? Igor's entering a contract year. I would be absolutely floored and stunned if he's not a Ranger next year, even if they have to go into the double digits. I mean, come on now. The guy deserves double digits. So I would go with Shesterkin in that mix. If you go 25 and under, I will note that Swayman is the #1 goalie in our keeper rankings over Jake Ottinger, over Kochetkov, Stuart Skinner, Wallstead, Askarov, guys like that. So I think that there is a lot of potential for Swayman to win the Vezina this season, but we're not off to a good start here, right? They got to sign the dotted line.
Well, I was going to say he needs a contract if he wants to win a Vezina, and shout out again to our friends over at Skip for hooking up that tasty question. I'm going with Shesterkin. I know he's playing for a contract. You know how I feel, guys, about contract year guys, and I just like the Rangers a bit better. I think there's still some questions for me when it comes to the Boston Bruins. You lose Linus Ullmark, so I wonder how that plays into the psyche of that situation in between the pipes. And again, you've got a contract to figure out here with Jeremy Swayman, so I'd probably lean in the way of Shesterkin. I think when you look at the Boston Bruins and that whole situation there. But in general, Jake, I was going to ask you about the crease, right? You look at it from a keeper league perspective. It's so volatile. I just wonder if, how to handle that from a fantasy perspective.
It's hard to feel safe keeping many of these guys. Like even Jeremy Swayman, Pete mentioned how he's #1 ranked on the keeper league list, which I can't disagree with his potential moving forward. But we've seen how Boston's used their goaltenders the last couple of years. Who's to say they're not just going to do the same thing with Korpisalo and Swayman? Even if they do get him under contract, that might just be the game plan for Boston moving forward. So that becomes a little bit tricky. And yeah, I think outside of maybe Igor Shesterkin and a couple of guys at the top, it's tough to spend, I think, a big keeper pick on one of these players. I think I'd rather wait to the mid rounds and use my goaltending play on someone else.
NHL.com/fantasy, best 25 and under options for your keeper leagues. I want to keep the ball rolling here, Pete. Preseason standouts. Adam Fantilli, 4 goals, leads the entire preseason, playing with JVR and Igor Chinakhov and PP1. Dylan Holloway is another fascinating name because of the old offer sheet situation, Pete, but he's had a really, really good start here for St. Louis.
He is. It's going to be fun to watch him in a top 6 role, something he could not, put his finger on in an extended fashion with the Oilers, unfortunately. But I just remember that 3-point game he had when the Oilers were facing elimination in the Stanley Cup final last year. That screams untapped potential, right, Jake? So I'm really excited about Holloway. I'd take him in the late round of a fantasy draft. Adam Boqvist, you mentioned earlier. Someone's got to get PP1 for the Florida Panthers, guys, right? Montour's not there anymore. Seems like it might be Boqvist. Injury concerns, plenty of them there, but he has always had that untapped gear that we have yet to see. Adam Boqvist, deep sleeper.
Well, there's a player and there's a team I'm pretty bullish on, guys, and it's the Buffalo Sabres. What could go wrong being bullish on the Buffalo Sabres? I've done 2 drafts so far, and I'm way too overexposed to the Buffalo Sabres. Like I'm setting myself up for some failure based on what that team's done over the last decade plus. But we talked about UPL a little bit, his potential. I think Tage Thompson's going way too low in drafts as well after a bit of a disappointing season. But JJ Peterka is one of the preseason standouts as well. Pete, did you have interest in him before? Is your interest spiking a little bit based on what he's done in the preseason? I think with Skinner out of there now just opens up more potential for Peterka to absolutely crush it this year.
I mean, he was already turning into their best point scoring wing last season because Skinner took a big step back and then of course got bought out. So yeah, Peterka, if he's up top with Tage Thompson and Alex Tuch, I feel like that's really a top 10 line trio in the entire NHL. Maybe it's a little bold to say that, but I don't think so. So he's got the driver's seat right now. I also like Zach Benson. I like Jack Quinn. I know that we've touched on these guys over the course of the whole offseason, but looks like they're all in the top 6 together. That means good things for Dylan Cousins. And from a keeper league standpoint, the Buffalo Sabres do have a really nice arc the next couple of years. So I'm excited about what I saw so far in the Global Series, and they'll kick off the NHL season this Friday.
I don't know what it is about this podcast, but people just love the Buffalo Sabres. And until like 13 years ago, they were in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Guys, think about where you were 13 years ago. So I'm not as bullish. I think individually, from a fantasy standpoint, there's players I want to touch. I like the Jack Quinn look. I think he's going to break out at some point in time. Love Peterka. My main concern with Buffalo, can they keep the puck out of the net? I know goaltending-wise was good last year, but can they replicate that? From a defensive standpoint, Lindy Ruff back in the equation. I think it's a difficult division to compete in, the Atlantic Division. So a lot of question marks surrounding Buffalo. Last but not least, just want to touch on Jake DeBrusk in Vancouver. If you remember back, Pete, July 1 around there, we liked the fit, and he's playing with Elias Pettersson, the forward one, and Jonathan Lekaramaki. I mean, that's a pretty good spot for DeBrusk and PP1.
Absolutely. He's a guy that he's never had a 60-point season or anything like that from his Boston days. A lot of nice spurts. You're going to see his most consistent performance if he stays healthy this season. 60, 65 points, 30, 35 goals, playing with Petey up top, or even JT Miller. They like to spread out their centers. That's good news for DeBrusk. He's going to have a great center line mate no matter which way you slice it. So great late round flyer there. He's going to have a career year.
A little primer for a betting preview podcast on Thursday featuring Michael Leboff. Happy to bring in Tim Kalinowski from Snapback Sports. What's going on, Tim?
What's going on, Nick? Good to be here. It's off season flies by, apparently.
I am jacked for this regular season. First and foremost, cup plays. Who are you looking at?
I got to say, I like Vegas. I like Vegas. This is kind of, in the territory of, not one of the top heavy favorites and kind of middle of the board where I could see here. I just think that it was a total blessing in disguise for Vegas, to have an early exit in the playoffs last year, and unless you're like kind of an up and coming team, say New Jersey, Buffalo, something like that, a veteran team like this Vegas team, it's like, you know what, if you're not going to win the whole thing, just get out early, heal up. They barely got to play with their full roster intact that they want to have going forward. So I look at this Vegas team could almost be like remember the Bruins a couple of years ago where like, oh, Bergeron's toast, Marchand's toast, and they go have their best regular season in hockey history. So I think Vegas is kind of like it could be in that surprising territory.
Anybody in the East, Tim? Can I sell you on the Boston Bruins? I know you just mentioned them in that comparable there. People might be down on them with the Swayman contract negotiations. I think Boston could be primed for a run, but is there anybody else in the East you have some interest in?
You absolutely can sell me on Boston, and especially when people start to they try and play father time on the Bruins, right? I mean, I'm the biggest idiot. I bet Bruins to miss the playoffs probably every year for the past 5 years. Always trying to get one step ahead of the sell on the Bruins, but I think you're bang on there, especially with the goaltending situation. Like, the Boston media here has kind of been saying, look, the Bruins, name like a Bruins goalie who didn't turn out, to have a great season. This goalie Bob blesses everybody that comes in that door, and regardless who ends up in the crease, I wouldn't say don't bet the Bruins because of the goaltending situation. I actually think that could kind of give you an advantage in terms of a betting edge from what the numbers are saying. You know what? I'm going to say it. I'm sorry. I kind of like Buffalo a little bit sneaky.
Oh, here we go again. We just talked about that earlier on. Please explain yourself.
Look, somebody has to, we can't just have the same teams over and over again. So someone has to slide in eventually. I think they got the goaltending thing shored up at least last season, and, healthy Tage Thompson. I'm going to be going a little further with that as we get into this, but it's all about timing. And I think that the timing, just a good reset for this team. It has to be eventually, right? It has to happen at some point.
Probably not.
You're right. That's
Hart Trophy futures. Connor McDavid against the field. Who do you have?
I think I'm going to take the field. I just talked about him, but Tage Thompson, 50-1. This is a guy who scored 38, 47, and then 29 last year through 71 games, was banged up, played banged up as well. I don't want to tie up a ton of money in the futures board when just tie it up. I don't want a ton of money tied up in the futures board as we go throughout the entire season. And the NHL is something where the odds makers move in slow motion. So sometimes Tage could start 10 goals through 10 games and they still wouldn't move this thing, and you could still jump on it.
You're speaking my language, Tim, because I mentioned Tage earlier in this episode as a great value play from a fantasy hockey perspective. So I can't knock you for that. How do I not run it back with Nikita Kucherov around 20-1 though? I got a great sweat out of Kuch last year. I think he's a guy that could put up a point total to challenge McDavid. And I just think he's going to be in on like 50% of the goals in Tampa Bay this year. So Kucherov, McKinnon, the big dogs that went at it last year. Do you have interest in any of those guys?
I don't want to bet the big dogs. I really don't, because even as this thing gets going, like the Cooch talk last year, as deep as that got into the season, was still a legitimate conversation. And, and then Austin was, on the come up. Like this is more of a thing to me of you circle a few guys now, like take a screenshot of that odds board and then pop it open in December and see, wait, that guy, for all that talk in September, that guy only moved, 200 cents, whatever it is. Like I would just say, and I learned this last year, right? I was talking about how great it was to have Florida. I got Florida to win Stanley Cup 20-1 last year in December. Like you can still get on this as it moves. So I think, your instincts are fine, but we can take advantage of the board a little bit here. It's not like the NFL. You got to bet that thing by the friggin' minute. Okay. You don't have to be a day trader in the NHL.
We don't talk about the NFL on this podcast, Tim. You know this. You like a few player season props. What are you looking at?
Yeah. Frank Vetrano under 25.5 goals. It's a guy who had a career year last year. He's going to be moved down the lineup a little bit. Anaheim, obviously, I actually, Leboff and Nick Martin like Anaheim a lot this year. And part of it is obviously the young stars, but just by default, Vetrano moves down the lineup a little bit. So I like under 25.5, a little fade there. I like Beniers 20+ goals this season. I think he bounces back. He just kind of that sophomore slump last season. Then I'll round it out with Robert Thomas over 26.5 goals. I think I would love to be able to ladder this in some way to 30+, 35+, because I think this guy's ready to take another big step.
You mentioned Beniers there, Tim. I don't hate Shane Wright maybe to have that step forward this year as well and get some opportunity. But looking at a couple of other interesting awards, I think the Calder is fascinating this year. There's probably so many different opinions out there. Michkov's obviously dazzling in preseason, but we're not getting great odds there. Anybody in the Calder race interest you before the season?
I actually have one I don't want to bet. That's what I came with. Dustin Wolf, 16-1. I would not touch that with a 10-foot pole. This Calgary team, it could look real ugly there. And he hasn't been great. And I've learned this kind of from Nick Martin, who was saying, well, just wait till they get Wolf up with the big club. Just you wait. And then he kind of, had the guts to say, I think this guy might be a little too small. I don't really see it. And this defense is going to be, it's quite bare. And so I would say just avoid that at all costs. And again, I was on here a year ago and I said, I don't know if I want to bet Bedard because I think he's going to get hurt. Sure enough, Bedard gets hurt and he still wins it. So maybe this market for Tim is not the one. This is like with one market I said, I'm not touching it.
Nothing wrong with that, Tim. You bring the heat as per usual. You're going to be a frequent visitor on this podcast all season long. Appreciate the time today.
One more, Nick. UPL Buffalo while we're here. 125-1 for the Vezina.
I just mentioned Tim's going to be on the podcast the rest of the season. We're not doing that anymore. Thanks, Tim.
Bye, guys. Appreciate it.
Tim Kalinowski from Snapback Sports. Pete, you're doing the show with Michael Leboff on Thursday. Jake, you'll be alongside as well. Give us a little tease, Pete, of what to expect, on Thursday.
Well, we're going to feed off all these conversations about sleepers and breakouts and everything like that and put it towards a betting lens with Leboff in even more extended fashion than we just did with Timmy. I think that I'm curious to see where Leboff is directing in terms of coach of the year, right? You could go in the Utah direction. I like a lot of their deep sleepers, Utah, Connor Ingram, Josh Doan, Dylan Gunther, right? Logan Cooley, Jake, but maybe Leboff is still in on Andre Turigny for coach of the year. Could be a little bit more realistic with the appeal of the whole Utah relocation.
I like that. As mentioned, I won't be here. So a couple of plays I like. I like Jake Ottinger for the Vezina Trophy. I'll be playing that. And I know everything that's transpired the last month's been really, really tough in the hockey world. Give me the Columbus Blue Jackets to make the Stanley Cup playoffs. I just think this is a polarizing moment clearly for this team. It's a tough moment. I think they're going to rally and band around each other. And I think there's value in that, Jake, right now.
Guys, I mean, this has to be the year we see someone break through in the East, right?
Yeah.
Nick, you mentioned Columbus and you make your case for them. And I could certainly see the ceiling potential there. A head coach that actually knows what he's doing this year, I think is going to go a long way for that team as well after everything that they went through last year in the coaching department. So it's tough with the Laine injury news now, but I was even looking at the Montreal Canadiens as a potential to be that team to take that step. At some point, we got to see somebody break through in the East, right? I know Nick's not in on Buffalo, but there's a couple teams with potential there to maybe take that step.
I'm taking the over on everything Sean Monahan this season, by the way. Don't sleep on my guy Dean Evison in Columbus either. So that's coming up on Thursday, our full betting preview for the upcoming season featuring Michael Leboff, again, who'll be a frequent visitor on this podcast all season long. Make sure you go ahead and check out all of our season preview podcasts from earlier this summer, Mock Draft 1.0, Rookie Sleepers, Breakouts, Bounce Backs, Stat Projections, Fantasy Top 200 Rankings. All that is coming your way. Many thanks to Tim Kalinowski for dropping by. Thanks to producer Bob Bender, for Pete Jensen and Jay Kahn. I'm Nick Alberga. You've been listening to NHL Fantasy on Ice, delivered by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.